Hi, I'm Simon. Welcome to Watercolour Wildlife. In today's lesson, we're going to be painting Natalie, this cow. Reason I know she's called Natalie, she's got a little tag in her ear that says Natalie on it. She's because of the angle that the photographer's used, or the lens that this photographer has used. It's a really wide angle lens, so it's brought her nose right forward and pushed her body right back. You've got a great perspective on it. Should be good fun. Grab your brushes and let's get painting. Okay, so looking at the sketchbook, you can see that I've already chosen my palette. So the colours that I've got here, I've chosen magenta, a lighter ochre and a Payne's grey. I was trying to get this pink, so there's a slight pink in the nose there, and it seems to be somewhere around here. So kind of 50-50 mix of lighter ochre and magenta, but with lots of water in it. The other colour that I'm going to use is Payne's grey. I use that a lot. But what I want to do is get my mixes made up, because we're going to be working quite quickly with this one. So it's getting our mixes made up, make sure we're happy with the colours that we've got, and that we've got plenty of it mixed up, so that we can work really quickly with this picture. Not sure, I tend to start with the ears on cows, don't know why. But so the first mix I'm going to make up, I guess, is actually I'm going to make up some of this this kind of pink. So I'm just dipping into the magenta there. Just give myself a bit on there. Dab that off. Clean my brush. Then I'm just going to go with a little bit of yellow ochre. So I think we decided somewhere as a 50-50 mix. I don't want it to go too orangey. Let's just try a little bit of that on our test sheet here. That's quite good. It's quite a good pink colour. You can kind of vary the tones a little bit, you know, bring in a bit more of the magenta or bring in a bit more of the yellow ochre. Don't want it to be too orange. That's the only thing. It wants to be quite pink. I think that's a great pink colour. So I think we've got enough there for the nose. So kind of let's clean our brush off. And we will mix up a little bit of the Payne's grey so that we've got a wash here. So just grabbing some, what I should be doing is grabbing clean water there. Payne's grey. Give it a good mix. Make sure all the paint's mixed in with that wash. Now I want it to be quite strong. I'm not going to layer this up too much, this painting. So we're going to do a lot of the work in the early layers. So I want them to be quite intense. You know, I'll probably do the ears in a couple of brush strokes and then leave them. So I want them to be almost a finished tone. So dark. They've got to end up dark. I want that to be quite intense. I'm going to put in a little bit more Payne's grey, just to make sure that I haven't got a wishy-washy mix on this. So we've got quite a soft wishy-washy mix, I suppose, on the pink, but this Payne's grey mix I want to be really strong. Also going to use it for the eyes, a little bit of splashing. Okay, so this is going to be quite quick, I think. Once you've got everything ready, you've got your colours there, you're happy with your pink, you've got your Payne's grey. I'm just going to start dropping in the ears. Now, I'm just going to move that out of the way so I've got a bit more test paper. So I'm just going to draw a quick ear, you know, there. That's kind of what I'm going to do. It's just a couple of strokes following that. Brush side on, so I'm going to use the brush probably on its side. I'm just going to grab another piece of test paper. Running out of test paper. Okay, so I'm just going to show you here, look, we've got the ears here and the ear here. Going to have my brush side on and just fill in that shape. So very quick. You can see actually my mix is probably not dark enough. I want that to be really dark, so I'm going to end up Just putting a bit more in there, following those the shape of those ears. Haven't done it very well there. Haven't got a drawing, so very quick, and you're just going to end up with these very loose, very splashy kind of effects. It's a happy accident kind of thing. You've got to be quick. It's not precise. Let's put that down there. Keep my little dabbing brush there. Okay, I think we'll just go in now. Now, actually, I'll talk about this just before I do the ears, because I'm going to move quite quickly. I'm going to do these bits of the head that are dark. Yeah, just thinking about this. Maybe to speed things up, I'm going to leave my brush there with all of that paint on it. I'm just going to put in a wash of this pink. So I've just grabbed another big brush. I've got a couple. If you haven't got two big brushes, you can just clean up your other brush. So I've got some of that pink mix on here, and I'm just going to put in some of these pink tones into the mouth here. So I'm keeping it quite loose, just creating textures as I do it. So not applying it in a nice even wash. You know, it's a little bit lumpy, it's a little bit bumpy. It has to get some of this pink, and then we'll let that dry. Have a bit more. There's going to be a lot of black going over this, so it's just getting a slight undertone of that pink colour. Just a bit of texture. Just going to flick a little bit. Try and intensify that colour in a couple of places. So just mixing up a bit more of our pink into the magenta and the yellow ochre. That's quite a sort of more intense version of that colour. So I'm just going to drop in a bit where there's a shadow here, so just under here. Maybe something there that's quite red. But it'll dry it lighter. We'll put a bit of shading over it. So I don't think it's too bad. Also, having the warm colour there is going to bring that part of the face, this part of the face, towards you. Okay, so while that's still, I mean, I didn't use much water on that, so it's still a bit damp. I'm going to stay quite clear of it. I'm just going to switch back to my brush here that I had loaded up with the Payne's Grey, and I'm going to drop in some of these ears. So this patch here is there's a little bit of white, there's a little bit of white here, there's a little bit of white there, so I'm just going to try and leave those areas as I go. I want this line here to be quite sharp. I'm just going to drop in that line and then just see what we get, really. And just stop there. So again with this one, just this line, I actually want to be quite sharp because that's actually the edge of his nose, her nose, sorry. And just brush side on, so I'm getting this kind of dry brush. This is wet on dry, this technique. And I'm just dropping in a bit of the shadows that are in the inside of the ear there. So this is probably the darkest bit. So I'm just going to put in a bit of shadowing, just loading up my brush with lots of Payne's Grey, very little water. And now I'm using a wet in wet technique, in that it's already wet. So, and now I'm just putting in more pigment into the wet areas, and we'll leave it at that, I think. So I can't really work. This is still a little bit damp. If I support my hand, so I'm just using my pinky there just to rest my hand on. Still got quite a big brush, and I just want to start dropping in some of this eye, or not the eye, the kind of the dark area around the eye. Going to be quite precise but quite quick still. Don't want it to be all all covered. Leave little bits of highlights. We'll go in and we'll sort out the eye properly a little later. So probably just, I think I've gone just a little bit into that eye. Just going to grab a little piece of tissue paper and just a tiny little point and just lift out a little bit. And we could sort that out with gouache later on, but just lifting out a little bit of that black paint there. And that will do. So I've still got lots of the Payne's grey on here. I'm going to start dropping it in on the other side. And I guess just vary your technique, strokes. It's quite a flat painting, this. I'm not looking for a lot of depth. So we can just more or less fill that in. I'm just going to go in with a smaller brush. Again, load it up with, it doesn't matter what size, just something a bit smaller. This is quite a small one. It's probably one of the smallest brushes I use. And I'm just going to tidy up that edge around the eye a little bit. And the same on that side. We'll go in and do the pupil a little bit later on. Okay, this is coming together. Let's rinse that brush out. I want to do maybe the nostrils, so there's a little bit of shadowing in those nostrils. I don't want this to be too strong, so just gonna try and do a couple, again in a couple of flicks. Less brushwork I can do, the more I like it, really. So I'm just going to bring, I've got kind of a chisel point on my brush there, plenty of Payne's grey, and just give it a little downward stroke and a kind of a bend and a flick up that way. And just see what you get, play around. Just want that to flick up, I think, that end. That's good. A little bit more pigment into the dark corner here. I want to put a little, now that those lips I think are fairly dry, I want to put a bit of a watery mix, so you can see not too much water. And we're just going to do a wash over the top, so it's a light grey, just to start bringing in some of these shadows. So just looking up here, just going to drop in a bit of a shadow there. This actually comes down and round and into the mouth here. And then it's quite dark down here. Just looking at my source drawing all the time. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit there so you can see the kind of shadows that I'm putting in. I want to just soften that line a little bit. Just a little bit of clean water, or it doesn't actually matter, it's that slightly dirty water, but that's okay. And I'm just going to try and soften this line. So just going up to it with a bit of water on my brush, just touching up to that line. I don't want it to be so hard and obvious. And just tidying up the top here. And by using a brush, you can also just lift out some of the pigment where you don't want it to be quite so strong. Just using this brush to lift out. And again, just there's a little shadow in here, just the kind of chin comes up. Just getting a bit more Payne's grey. I don't want it to be too strong. So I'm actually going to switch to a bigger brush. Again, still this watery Payne's grey, not too much water, but not too strong a mix. Okay, and I'm just going to drop in some of these shadows around here. There's a big patch on the knee there. Let's just do those little strokes down here. Just indicating the feet down here. I do paint fairly loosely. It's not really an important part of the picture for me. It's all about the face. I'm just going to soften these again a little bit. So some clean water, dabbing it off on my cloth, and then just going and slowly soften just some of those edges. Okay, I'm just going to pop a little bit in there, just to get a bit of a shadow in there. Little bits of shadow around here. Now I want to go in, now that that pink area is, pink of the nose there is dry, I want to start dropping in some of these black shapes. So again, just test that, make sure it's not too wet. I don't want this to be too wet, but I want it to be quite a strong mix. So it's almost dry brushing. Now some of these areas of dark in the nose here, if you're looking at the source image here, they kind of go into the bottom area of the lip, or the bottom lip there as well. My bottom lip here is still a little bit wet, so I'm going to be careful around there. Just going to start dropping in some of these shapes. And it's just keeping it loose. It's not an exact copy. Just laying in some of this pigmentation that they have. Just dabbing it side of the brush, changing the shape, using a point. Just create a variety of shapes in there. Now this is probably going to bleed. I should probably wait a little while. This is going to bleed a little bit if I go too far into that. It's still a little wet. I don't mind a bit of bleeding. Just see what happens here. Drop a little bit in here. See, that's where it is quite wet still. And I just do want to put in a little bit more of this shadow. So I'm just dragging a little bit of that all the way over. And this is quite a dark area in the corner there, so I think we just put a bit more pigment down there. And she's getting there. So I think at this point it's probably nice to introduce a little bit of splashing. I'm going to actually just increase the value in this. I want this to be darker. I need some more Payne's grey. Dip it in there. A lot of Payne's grey on my brush now, and just increasing that. Also adding texture, I suppose, a little bit. I can just drop in a bit more pigment into these areas that I've already done. And you can see actually within these dark areas there are these, it almost looks like I'm not sure how you describe that, but kind of that patination in there. And we can achieve that probably with just a few flicks of water or something similar. So I'm just going to grab some clean water. Still quite a lot of water on here, so don't want to go too mad with this. Clean water, little flicks, I'm going to do this just to bring in some texture. What I'm also going to do is do the same in the ears there. So just to introduce a bit of splashing, but this is with clean water, so you're not going to see the effect straight away, but when that water bleeds a little bit, it will start showing up. And I'm just going to want to soften some areas and introduce some texture. Okay, so I've got quite a strong mix of Payne's grey here on my brush, and I'm just going to flick a bit of that now. So I've got paint and just flick a bit of that into the ears, just a little bit, just to, you know, they're kind of hairy and just a bit of movement. Don't go too crazy. Just make sure you can see that. Little flicks just in the body here, and you can start introducing just some of the kind of hair and the whiskers that are coming out, just not too much at this stage. Little flicks. Okay. So if you're impatient like me and you can't be bothered to wait for it to dry, pick an area that's kind of dry. I'm going to support my hand. I've got my pinky kind of planted there, just so that I can support my hand and paint this. I'm going to paint this pupil. Probably got a slightly too big a brush there. I'm just going to switch that up. Smaller brush, plenty of pigment. Now this eye, you might be tempted to just paint that whole eye in black. I mean, actually that's probably what I'm going to do to start with, but then I'll lift it out because there's quite a reflection in the top part of that pupil. So I'm just going to drop in plenty of pigment in there to start with. Just paint over the whole, you can paint over the whole eye for this. And then just making sure that it kind of joins up. That is kind of his pupil. And just grab a piece of your tissue, and I'm just going to press it into the top half of the eye there, just to lift out that highlight. Actually pulled up a lot of the paint there. Wasn't expecting to pull out quite that much. Put a little bit of that. Get that eyelash back in. Just leave a little highlight in the top there. And then I'm going to move on to the next one. So I'm just planting my pinky here to give me some support and a dry bit. And I want this to be really strong, this mix, because I want the eye to stand out a little bit from that background. So that's the whites of her eye. I'll just put in a little eyebrow. Yeah. Probably going to make that pupil a little bigger. That's where I've drawn it, but I think I'm going to round it off a little bit. She hasn't got quite so much of the whites of her eye showing. Doesn't look quite so crazy. This shadow here, this wants to be filled in really. Now, rather than using before when I lifted out that top part of the eye, the kind of highlights in the top of the eye, I took out too much with that. So I'm just going to use a brush instead, just to lift out little bits of the top of each pupil, just to put a little highlight in there. So clean my brush, dab it on my piece of tissue paper, and you can just use it to lift out the top reflection in the eye. That's it. Okay, so I think I want to do a little bit more flicking. I want a little bit more pink in that nose actually, so that's possibly a good time to do it. Let's try it. I'm grabbing some of my pink, and that's magenta and a yellow ochre. I'm just going to start dropping in a bit more texture, and I'm going to try and vary this a little bit in terms of the tone, so I'm going to put a little bit of yellow ochre in there now. Let's make it a little bit more orange. Now they're looking at your source photo. This is quite much more yellowy, I suppose. So I'm just going to get a little bit more yellowy. Just drop in this kind of, because it's kind of defining a few of these shapes with this. It's a slightly different colour. It's a bit warmer. Help to bring this area of the painting forward. Just rinsing my brush. And a bit of clean water. Soften some of these edges really. I want those to not quite be so hard. I do want some bleeding as well, so I want these areas just to mix. Not too much. Just touching it, just softening some of the hard areas with clean water, slightly damp brush, just where I don't want such hard edges. And I'm going to just flick a bit of this colour to other areas of the painting just to help balance it out. I want a little bit of this tone down in the legs, I think. Just little touches. Doesn't have to be, don't have to go mad. What I'm going to do is just lift out that pink, and that orange is maybe slightly too strong in places. So I'm just going to use a rolled up bit of tissue. Just start, and this will also add a texture. If you do it quite lightly in areas, you can use it to add more texture to this nose. And just dab it over till you're happy. You can also use it just to slightly soften edges, just until you're happy with the overall effect. Just lifting out. Let's see what we've got here. That's quite nice. You see, lifted out a bit of that paint in the ear there. It's given a nice bit of texture. You can just see that it's still wet on the edge of the corner of that ear, so I'm just going to try the same thing there. See how you just lift out that still wet paint, and it's given that really nice texture. Okay, she's getting there. I think what we need to do now is a little bit of splashing with, oh, I dirtied my water there. Let's go back into that one. So I've got some white gouache in my palette here already. Just going to get a nice strong mix, but you want it to flick, so you do need to mix a bit of water with it. It won't work straight out of the pan, straight out of the tube. Just make sure you've got enough of it. I'm just going to start flicking in some of these whiskers now. Actually, I might wait just 5 minutes, I think. Needs to dry before I start doing this, otherwise this is it's gonna bleed too much, I think. I don't mind a bit of bleeding, but I think it's gonna bleed a little too much, so just gonna give it 5 minutes to dry, and I'll be back. Okay, so I think it's more or less dry enough now. Still a little bit damp, but that's gonna add a bit of dynamism to it. We're not gonna quite know how much it's gonna bleed, so I'm just gonna start flicking. Sometimes it's going to be hard for you to see exactly the movements I'm making, but you know, essentially I'm flicking like this. I will turn my finger around to flick in different directions, you know, depending on the direction I want to flick in. I will, yeah, it might be harder for you to see. So just going to start with flicking in some of these whiskers that at the bottom here. And you see I need more water. I want these to be quite dramatic, these splashes. Just a bit more water on in my mix, and just start. I want them to be quite, you know, you want to be able to notice these ones because it's white on top of it, on top of the painting. You want them to stand up. So just flicking in these wonderful whiskers, you know, there's a little bit coming out the eye, you know, sticking out the top here. Try and generate lines. So you want long lines. These are the whiskers we're trying to get. So try and make your lines extend as far as you can, I suppose. And you see this wonderful bleeding actually that's happening in the nose here. Because it is slightly wet, you're getting these little explosions, little stars, which I really like. So I'm just going to try and do a little bit of detailed splashing, I suppose. So just a bit more water. Just want to come over this line a bit, so hopefully you can pick this up on the side camera. Just having a look. I'm doing this at a slightly weird angle so that you can see it. I would probably normally do it like that and you might not be able to see it as well, but just trying to get my hand out the way so you can see it. Just want a bit more splashing up here. Just need some hair detail. I'm actually going to grab my rigger brush. It's another good one for doing whiskers. Just clean up my fingers a bit. So rigger brush, long, thin. Use it for painting rigging on ships. I think that's why it's called a rigger brush. It's used by sign writers a lot. Get long, continuous lines. Holds a lot of paint for the size of the brush. So yeah, let's just flick in a few. Just don't want to overwork it. Don't want to make it look like it's painted too much. Just getting in a few of these more defined whiskers. And yeah, just creating some of this hair around the chin here. Now this is where I suppose you could go quite detailed. You could add in these little hairs all day long, really, just little white touches. And always going in the direction of the hair with these, you know. Let's see, there's a bit of hair on these ears, maybe. Just cut into the bottom of those. This is really done, I suppose. Anything I'm doing now is just kind of little touch-ups. A little bit of that highlight coming down there. Just going to move this iPad if I can. There we go. Just have a look at where some of the highlights are. Just drop in. I've left highlights, I guess, in white paint with the white paper in most places, but I might just want to add some highlights where you think they need them. Let's have a look at the eyes. Probably make this pupil a little bigger. Probably using the wrong brush for this. Probably go to a smaller brush, but you can still get quite a fine point on that. That eye I think is pretty good. Doesn't really need messing around with. Some nice highlights in there. Might put a little bit more dark into that eye. A little bit more of your Payne's grey on the bottom. That's it. I want to go. I'm starting to mess around now. That's a bit wet for me to messing around. I might just want to define that edge of the eye a little bit. But I can't do it now because it's a little bit wet. So I'll just try and dry that a little bit. Need that to dry before I can fix it really. Try and fix it with, I'm just trying to lift out some of this. So I'm just using the, oh, I need a point on that brush. That's better. A fine point, just trying to define this. I think I need to leave it a couple of minutes just to have a look at it. It's always good to kind of step back from your painting. Often you can't see the wood for the trees, so you need to step away, come back, look at it, and often any mistakes that you've made will be quite obvious. I know that I need to do some work on that eye, but the painting needs to be dry, so just going to leave it a couple of minutes and let it dry. Okay, so I've let it dry for a couple of minutes and just taken a chance to step back and look at it. And one of the things I've noticed, I need to define this, I think this line between the top and the bottom lip a little bit more. I'm just going to grab a kind of a slightly pinky Payne's Grey mix. So I'm just letting the Payne's Grey mix in with that kind of pink mix that we've got. And just want to define this line a little. Let's go in with black. Now there's actually still quite a lot of wet gouache on there, but that's okay. Be a bit careful, just defining that edge a little bit. Just going to clean my brush, watery mix now. Try and soften some of that. I'm just getting some of these shadows in here. Also just making sure that you know that that's where this bottom lip ends. Now I'm just going to let this bleed up a bit, just going to blend that a little bit in. I want it to be quite as sharp a line, I just wanted the definition there. So I'm going to grab my rigger now, clean it up, just dab it off, and grab some Payne's Grey. Quite a strong mix. Just dropping in. Just defining a little bit. Actually, this works quite nicely, even though the cow's Natalie's. Should I call her Natalie? Just putting in some dark hairs, I suppose, just to highlight some of the shape. So I suppose this is almost sketching again. Just a few darker lines just to sort of define this shape a bit. What do we think? I think that's probably it. I'm fairly happy with it. Saying that. Scrap that. Haven't worked on that eye yet, have I? Let me grab a bit more Payne's Grey. all I wanted to do was just make the pupil just a little bit bigger. It seemed quite as big as the other side, so I just wanted to just define that, make it a little bigger. Okay, I think I'm going to call her done. Hope you've got some results you're pleased with, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.